So what do we do about it? Let's talk about powering up. 3 strategies that you can pick from as your beginning point. Manage them. So manage them, don't enable them. With my clients in particular, we manage, we sort of, what's the word I want? We're sort of always pushing them around without them necessarily being aware of it. And this was the conversation I had with my client today. I said, you have to think of this individual as a child who happens to be in an adult's body. And that's the reality when you're dealing with a narcissist and when you're dealing with a narcissistic persona. If you have a tendency to be permissive, which is the challenge with this client that I was talking about today, he very much does, to rationalize their behavior, to indulge it, to avoid it, any of those things that come with being permissive, you have to stop, because it's not going to work. And this is the way the conversation went and with him. And I think this is just such a great example. He said, well, I've told him that it's non-negotiable, that the behavior needs to change. So now he has to figure out what he has to do in order to rebuild trust. And I said, no, he doesn't have to figure that out. You have to tell him. You have to tell him very specifically in black and white, this is what it looks like. In the same way you would say to a child who has just broken the rules, this is what it's going to take before I let you back out of the house, or this is what it's going to take before I give you back your technology, or this is what it's going to take before I trust you with the car again, right? That's what we do as parents, and it's no different when we're dealing with a narcissist. We have to manage them, we have to direct them, and we have to be really clear and specific around what it is that we expect to be. And so again, we are not being victims in this. We are only end up a victim if we choose to, but if we choose to look at how are we going to manage them, and that includes managing our bosses. We do it with clients all the time, because we do deal with a lot of clients that struggle with the narcissistic persona, is we just get really good at managing them in a way that, as they escalate, we diffuse, we shift them around, we redirect them, but ultimately we take them to where it is that we want to go and where we need to go, okay? Second thing, setting boundaries. Very important. If you struggle personally to set boundaries, this is really good practice for you, because if you have a hard time setting boundaries normally with people, with children, with spouses, with family, with coworkers, with whoever, it's going to be even harder with the narcissist, because you're going to feel like you don't have that power to be able to do it, okay? But many people let narcissists cross their boundaries and then get angry with them for when they do it. So you have to set those boundaries, you have to maintain them, and you have to have some real consequences when they fail to respect them. And in a non-emotional way, right? So this isn't about getting upset, it's not about being hurt, it's about simply staying with that objectivity around, I have a boundary and you're crossing that boundary, and and so this is, I'm going to sort of take a step back. So again, in my personal situation, I know sort of one of the boundaries that I always had was around sort of that expectation of what they would get to decide versus what I would get to decide. And I had certain boundaries where it's, no, these are my decisions to make, because in my marriage, he wanted to make all the decisions. He wanted to be in control of everything, and that goes hand in hand with the narcissistic persona. And so what I had was a set of boundaries where these are the things that I actually get to define, and these are the boundaries that I get to work with, and then he has to work with those boundaries as well, because that is what is going to hold me and protect me, because otherwise, I will morph into and be really, really adaptive and end up doing everything and not actually making sure that my agenda is being protected in some particular way. So boundaries, what would those boundaries be? Going along with that same theme a little bit further, what are your non-negotiables? Right? So I have a non-negotiable with my clients. They can't yell at me. They can't demean me. Personally, they can't, no matter, because my clients get upset with me, particularly if I'm pushing hard or I'm trying to get them through something, and I can trigger that response in them. I try hard not to, try to be able to navigate them through. But at the end of the day, sometimes, we end up with that response, but I'm very clear. It's like, well, let's stop there. Right? I remember one of my clients one time, a relatively new client, and I was bringing him information that he didn't like about his organization that I had collected up. And he started telling me that I was, a fraud, and that I was making it all up, and I had no idea what I was talking about. And, just essentially accused me of a whole bunch of professional misconduct. And I just sort of put my hand up and said, that's completely unacceptable. You know, I'm not actually going to engage in this conversation. And so I can either leave and come back, give you some time to absorb the information, or you can stop and we can continue on the conversation. Now, hard to do. Trust me, as someone who is naturally conflict avoidant, it's not easy, and I get that it's not easy. But what are your non-negotiables? I have another client of mine who's working very, very hard with it with her boss, that every time he starts to yell at her, she just stands up and says, I'm happy to come back and to continue this conversation when you're not in this state, right? Or when you're not yelling at me, because this is non-negotiable for me. I don't get yelled at work. Okay, because we have to have those things that allow us to stop being victimized. That if we don't have those really clear non-negotiables, if we're not prepared to put those non-negotiables out, then we end up being victimized by the narcissist, and we want to put an absolute end to that. Last but not least, and we say this all the time when we're talking about anything to do with behavior, get to know your self-protective pattern of behavior and get to know the things that trigger you into your self-protective system. If you don't think you are being self-protective, if you don't recognize when you're being self-protective and when your behavior has shifted into your self-protective persona, you can't change. Can't change our behavior. We can't develop. We can't reset those automatic survival patterns that have been hardwired into us from the time of our birth. If you don't recognize that you're not saying something, or you're agreeing because you don't want to get yelled at, and you don't realize that you're bringing a childhood survival strategy into the present, as though you're not an adult who can have different boundaries and different expectations as to how you're being treated. And again, I know it's hard, especially initially, because our brains, as I always say, they want status quo. They don't want us to rock the boat. They want to keep us protected. But this is how we survive it, in a way that we are keeping our confidence, our integrity, our authenticity, and ultimately our power absolutely intact. We do not have to allow ourselves to be victimized by the narcissistic persona. And so being aware of that and being aware of some of the tools that you need to start to employ is very, very important. But the starting point is always self-awareness. How is it that your behavior shifts? And then what do we start to work towards doing? And how do you move out of rationalizing it and accepting it, and going into that place of, how am I going to manage the child in the adult body? How am I going to set boundaries? What are my boundaries? What's non-negotiable? And then ultimately our self-protective behavior. The other thing that we always say too is you have to set a date or a time or an end point for when, if things do not get manageable, that you move on. One of the biggest risks to us in terms of our self-protective system, our, abandoning our own potential, is when we get so locked into that dynamic that we don't understand our own capability beyond it. And we think this is as good as it gets, because that's what our brain and our emotional brain starts to tell us. And instead, feeling like I am entitled to something more. I'm entitled to be treated better. I'm entitled to be treated differently. And how am I going to go out and get that? And if you do make a choice ever, particularly from a career perspective or a relationship perspective, to move out of the dynamic that you're in, if you're in one with a narcissist, you have to be really prepared to look for all of the red flags, because you don't want to move from one narcissistic relationship, either at work or at home, to another. And that is always our risk, because it has become our normal. We know we know we can survive working in that narcissistic environment, and the other might feel uncomfortable for us. And so we may unconsciously go out and seek out someone else who's like that without necessarily realizing it. So we want to be really, really super, super careful with that. So again, one thing you're going to put into practice, even if it's simply to, every time you're dealing with it, recognizing that you can't change the narcissistic self-protective behavior, right? Because it's an automatic pattern of behavior that gets triggered. They are in survival mode. So hoping that frees you up to feel like you have to stop. You don't have to keep trying to help them or to develop them or to take care of them in some particular way. You have a choice. You can't change their behavior, but you absolutely can make choices for yourself in terms of how you are going to stop enabling them, how you're going to maintain your own integrity, to not take their behavior personally, prevent their acting out, and ultimately providing oversight to help minimize or provide some level of damage control. So with that, everyone, again, look forward to hearing any of your challenges or comments. You can message me, or you can always post them in the comments. And good luck in surviving the narcissist that you are working with, and let us know how it goes.